In our last video, we created the two projects for the unit test. Now we will go on and finish the setup for our test-driven development. So every test uses a pattern which is called the 3A, AAA, and it's arranged, which is the phase where we set up our data for our test case. Act, where we act on our data and actually we call the method that we want to unit test. And then it's the assert, where we make sure that the outcomes are the ones we expect. For dynamics, we have the fake context, which is in-memory representation of our CRM instance. And this context is called the XRM fake context. And gets initialized like this. Now we should finish setting up our environment, so we have to add a reference to our CTEL plugins project because we want to test the functionality that it provides. And this is the setup. We can go and close our task and start with the next task, which is write the first failing test. So what we want to test is that our contact policy enforces a company policy, which is that every contact should have a primary customer ID, and it should have that because we want to calculate for every account the number of employees it has registered on our system. So we can start by having our context creating an account. So this is the account, and we want our account to be in the context, so we can initialize the context. And we want to have our target, because our plugin will have a target entity, which will be our let's call it contact. Our plugin will run on the create phase, so okay, so it will not have a GUID, will not be created yet. So we have to check that our contact has the account specified. And we can call a plugin, or better, we can simulate the pipeline of the dynamics where the plugin gets called by using the context. So we can pass our context entity, which is the contact, and we have to specify which is our plugin. So contact policy enforcer plugin. And what we actually want to receive as an end result is that when we execute our plugin without the account specified, it should throw an invalid plugin execution exception because it's a requirement. So we can do and record exception. This and we go ahead and save that to a variable, and we want to assert that assert true that the exception type is invalid plugin exception. Invalid. But first we want to make sure that an exception has occurred, so the empty exception. Now we can run our tests. And our test fails because we were expecting it to throw an exception, but our exception is not. So let's first change the names of our unit test because now we as we've seen here, our plugin does not throw an exception, so our first test is failing, and we can close our task here and go ahead with the next task. So we can go in our plugin and see that we have an context entity which we can get from our context. And then we can add our test. Now we have improved our plugin, and we expect our test here to pass because we added a check that ensures us that the primary customer ID is specified. So we can go ahead and run our test. And our test has passed. So we are testing that if our primary contact ID is not specified, primary customer ID is not specified, then the plugin throws an invalid plugin execution exception. So we can go ahead and close our task. Now to show the benefits of test-driven development, we can write another failing test. So what we want to write now is that we want to finish our functionality, so we can write another test that tests for the number of employees of an account to be incremented when we create a contact. So we can do it like this, and we can go ahead and copy some of our tests in the case before. And we start with our case where the number of employees for our account is 0. And then we create a new contact which has the primary contact ID set to our account. Customer ID is our account entity reference, because we can specify references, not the entire entity. And we want to act on our plugin, execute plugin in the target. The target is our contact. And we want to change our stage because we want to run our plugin in the stage 20, which is in the pre-execute. Now what we want to assert here is that our account in the context has the number of employees set to 1. So we get the updated account from the context, which for the moment, since we know it's 1, we can do it like create query. Now we have our account from the context, which actually is a different instance from our initial account because we are modifying it from the context. So what we want to assert is that equals. So our expected value for the number of employees is 1, and we can check it from the updated account. Get attribute value int. So we can go ahead and run our tests again. And we can see that our test fails because we have not implemented the functionality yet. So we go ahead and close our task and start with the other task, which is to improve our plugin. So we want to make sure that our account number of employees gets incremented from our plugin. So we get a reference of our account First we get the reference, the account reference from the context. So it's entity.get value. Okay, and we build account reference dot logical name reference dot ID. Actually, what we want to retrieve from the account is just the number of employees because we want to increment that. Now that we have our account, we want to set the account number employee equal to the account dot get value int plus 1 because we want to increment it. Now there is a case where the number of employees of an account might be null, But since we are using the get attribute value, which if the value does not exist returns the default value, then the default value for integer is 0, so we are correctly assigning the value for our account. Now we want to update this account in our context, let's say in our database. So what we will do is execute an update, the organization service dot update account. Really, it's not a very good practice to use the entity that we just retrieved from the system as the entity for the update, because there are other fields that might get updated. In our case, we just specified we need only our employees field, but if we receive other fields, other columns that we don't use but are there in the entity that we specify to update, then if we have plugins, even if the value does not change, if we have plugins registered in those fields, then those plugins will fire, because even if we specified the same value for the system, it's like an update. So we have to be careful on what entities we use for the update. Now we can go ahead and run our tests again. And as we can see, we have another problem, which if we didn't do unit tests, then we could not have caught this problem up to the moment when we upload our plugin in the system. And that problem is that I incorrectly specified the string as the type of primary customer ID, but it is not a string but an entity reference. So you can notice right away the utility of unit tests. Now we run our test again, and let's see, we expected our account to have account of 1, but it actually has account 0. Then we can go ahead and debug why is that so. We can add the watch to this. So we go ahead and update that and see that the number of employees should be 1. Probably a bug. Okay, let's change our stage here. Okay, we can debug it later, but this is the idea.